Can y'all hear me okay? All right, so Dane Huffman, I'm managing editor for Triangle Business Journal. Just one funny thing is I go to Christ Church, the Christ Episcopal Church, right across the way over there, and I understand that this building is owned by Good Shepherd. Is that right, Good Shepherd? So when I walked in, I saw that just like good Episcopalians, y'all are all in the back pews, so I feel right at home. I just kind of laughed. I'm like, okay, this is just like Christ Church, you know? But just say that I'm, yeah, it's kind of funny. But so I'm glad to be here. A couple things I just wanted to open with is y'all may have heard Bernie Reeves, who started Triangle Business Journal, just passed away. He's not somebody that I knew, but I read him a lot. Saw his stuff in the Metro. Saw his stuff from years ago in TBJ. One of the things I appreciate about Bernie Reeves, especially, he wrote from a different perspective. He has his own point of view, very conservative, a bit of a different voice, especially in that day, and it was a really good voice. It added a lot to this community. And what I like is when you get things from different perspectives, you can really understand things a lot better. And I try to read a lot of Fox News, read the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, stuff like that. When I first got invited to come speak to the John Locke Foundation from Donna, I was a little bit like, oh, they want somebody from the media to speak to the John Locke Foundation. I was a little bit like, I'm not sure how this is going to go. And it reminded me of a time years ago. I was speaking in Sharpsburg in Maryland, and there was a big battle during the Civil War up there where Lee first took his army up, 60,000 troops. They go up, and McClellan with 120,000 troops. They fight at the Battle of Sharpsburg. The battlefield there is extremely pretty. It looks exactly like it did back in the day. And there are 100 Union monuments up there. There are two Confederate monuments. So Chip Alexander and I from News Observer wanted to get a Confederate monument for the North Carolina troops put up there. So we went up there and we talked to the head of the park, and then they had this big meeting at a high school there. And all these people got up to talk about how they did not want monuments at the battlefield. They were not interested in more monuments. They did not look like the Battle of Gettysburg. And Chip and I are sitting there going, oh my gosh, so we had to come walking up after that. So I got up onto the podium, I'm looking out at this high school of all these people, and they're looking at me with extremely frowny faces, right? And I'm kind of like, well, hey, I'm Dane Huffman. I'm up here from North Carolina. I'm here to speak about adding another monument for the North Carolina troops here at Battle of Sharpsburg. I said, well, but, you know, we're Southerners, and we're used to being outnumbered out here. And everybody thankfully laughed and got the joke. But y'all actually look a lot more friendly than that particular group did, so I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. So like Donna mentioned, I've been at a lot of different places. I've been fortunate to work at some really good places. One of the things I've learned that regardless of where you are, great journalism starts with a great question. Great journalism starts with a great question. And the best question I've ever heard that led to a great story was, do you know how much a hog poops? Do you know how much a hog poops? And Pat Stith, who's the longtime investigative reporter at the News Observer, who is a legend in this area, would get all kinds of tips from people, like, oh, go cover this story. Oh, go write about this. Oh, why don't you go write about that? And most of it, you're like, okay, whatever. So he had this guy saying, you got to write about hog waste in eastern North Carolina. You need to do a story about this. This is really a big problem down there. And Pat's going like, well, who wants to write a story about hog waste, you know? Like, so anyways, so finally the guy says to him, he says, do you have any idea how much a hog poops? Do you know what that means? And Pat all of a sudden is like, that's really interesting. And so the point I'm making here is that it's the good question that leads to what are the downstream implications? What are the downstream implications? And especially in this particular case, those downstream implications are kind of messy, right? Because in Duplin County and Wallace and stuff like that, where's all this stuff going and what does that mean? Now the NNO, when I was still a young editor at the time, won a Pulitzer Prize for this back in 1996, and they did a phenomenal job. Pat Stith, Joby Warwick, Melanie Sill was the editor. And they won this Pulitzer Prize about what exactly happened and what that meant for the state of North Carolina. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a business story, but in the best business stories, they have real implications on real people. Now, 20 years later, here we are 20 years later, after that, the News Observer, when I left in 2007 to go to WREL, the NNO had 250 people in the newsroom. So 250 people in the newsroom, total staff of 1,100, 1,200, 100 million in revenue plus, something like that. That's not the case anymore. The staff there is a third the size of what it once was. WREL has staffed up, but even then WREL or WNCN, Channel 11, they don't have the firepower that sometimes newspapers do. So other people are jumping in to fill that in, like Donna was talking about, winning awards, which is great. So Carolina Journal is doing really good work. TVJ, we're trying to do really good work. So we're trying to fill that void and do those things and follow those types of stories. And a lot of that is what are the downstream implications. Now, if you guys have followed media, and I'm sure you do, the harder stories are harder for the staffs, especially these days, to do. TV stations have relatively small staffs. It's, we heard the other day where somebody said, crying moms are ratings gold. To some extent, that's really true, right? It sounds kind of harsh, but the fact of it is a local station, doing that, emotional sound, that's a really good story. Reporters tend to be really, really young. A lot of them are not particularly good at math. You don't have many people who say, I'm not trying to point you out, but you don't have many people who say, I think I want to be a reporter or an accountant. I can't decide, right? So a lot of these more difficult stories fall to TBJ and people like us. Pat Stith is retired, but I think it's incumbent on us to follow up and follow through and see what really happened. When I was at WNCN, there was a story that really I thought was fascinating. It was the type of story that we try to do at TBJ a lot. And Obama, when he was president, was going to come speak at NC State. Okay? So Obama's going to come speak at NC State, this big initiative that they had about batteries and sort of batteries of the future. So it's kind of like, well, when's the last time Obama came to the Triangle? So I was Googling it and looking at it and everything, and he had come and actually spoke at CRE, and some of y'all might remember this. So Obama, as president, comes and speaks at CRE in Durham, and he gives a big presentation about how he's going to start this jobs council. Okay, so he'll start this this council on jobs and competitiveness. And so I'm like, well, whatever happened to that? That's interesting. Well, two interesting things were about that. Number one, the council essentially did nothing. They met very few times. They were essentially disbanded about a year later, something like that, maybe a couple years later. So nothing happened. The other thing that really struck me was, so the President of the United States comes into our market, everybody covers it, everybody does a lot of stuff. Nobody really went back and said, well, what happened? What happened? And so at TBJ and at the good publications, as we all are, we need to go back and say what happened there, what happened there. So when the TBJ job came open, I was like, this is a chance for me to do that type of stuff. I learned a ton when I was in sports. I heard Jim Valvano talk about the value of work. You have to do the work along the way to put yourself in position to win. That was a big thing he talked about. I heard Mike Krzyzewski talk about how you have to keep the goal in mind. Coach K, better than anybody I've ever known, is like, our goal is to win the national title. Everything we need to do has to be aligned with winning the national championship. And it was fascinating to watch him work. But in business, it's about those revenues. So where are the dollars flowing? Where are they going? What are the implications for those dollars, and where does that go? That bottom line really matters. And that's the type of stuff we've tried to focus on. So at TBJ, we try to be not political. I'm not sure you can be completely apolitical, but not really get into the politics of it. We didn't do a whole lot on House Bill 2, stuff like that, other than trying to ask, okay, you're telling us that with House Bill 2, we're losing things. Tell us exactly what you've lost. Tell us exactly what you're losing beyond the sporting events and the other things that you talked about. Tell us exactly that. And I've really enjoyed these types of stories. So for example, we just did a story on, there's this huge, huge thing in real estate where these two huge companies, Lamar and Cal Atlantic, just merged. They're just two of the biggest builders in the United States. They're going to be by far the biggest builder in Raleigh now, right? So what does that mean for suppliers? What does that mean for people who are selling land? Does that mean the land sells for more? Like, as we know, finding 100 acres in this market to build a home development is really difficult. So does that mean a local developer now has to bid against this juggernaut for 100 acres in Apex? I mean, we're seeing farms in Apex, 125-acre farms, sell for millions and millions of dollars. We're seeing acres right around here sell for multi-million dollars. It's amazing. And so when you look at this, it's like, what's going to happen here? And the thing I loved about this story is they refused to talk to us. They didn't email us back. They didn't call us back. They didn't even confirm some of the things that we already knew. And that's fine. That's okay. But I like it when we say, no, we're going to do this story. We're going to be on it. We're going to go after this. And it was a really good story that sort of signaled to people, kind of here's what's coming in this situation. This is one of my favorite stories on Amazon. Everybody's talking about Amazon. Are we going to get Amazon? What are our chances of getting Amazon? And so what we try to just do is say, step back and say, aside from the rah-rah, could Raleigh get it, stuff like that, this is a great place to live and everything, what are the numbers here? What does this really mean? A couple of things that I learned in talking to some of the accountants and then talking to somebody in Washington who's an expert on tax policy is, regardless of your politics and your beliefs on tax policy in North Carolina, if you look at where Amazon picked, taxes were significant. Now, because I didn't come from a business background, sometimes I've had to catch up on stuff. So I went and read a book about Jeff Bezos just to understand Amazon. So as we're going into the story, I fully understand it. When they moved to Seattle because of the tax implications. They moved to Seattle initially. He basically packed up from New York, moved to Seattle, and started a business in his garage because in Seattle, they didn't tax online businesses that much. So that's where he wanted to be. Had nothing to do with the weather. He didn't have any friends there, anything like that. So if Jeff Bezos basically started the company in Seattle because of tax policy, you know that's going to be what they're thinking about when they're coming to House Bill 2. So North Carolina's taxes rate's 3.0% right now. It's dropping to 2.5%. The other thing I didn't understand is, and I had two accountants walk me through this, is how the taxes are charged is now based on only sales in the state of North Carolina, right? So it used to be, and y'all may know this, but it used to be your taxes would be based on an apportionment that would take into account your sales outside the state. Now, if you're Amazon and you're talking about billions and billions of revenue from outside the state, that's really significant. I had two accountants really walk me through this so I understood it. They're basically saying, look, Amazon, we're not in the picture with Amazon if that old law is still the case. Now, they're not running the North Carolina General Assembly, but these things matter. These things are important. And if we're not explaining it, it's very difficult for a young reporter at the News Observer to explain that type of tax policy. So that was really helpful. The other thing is when you really break down the numbers, and we talk about the tech workforce that we have here, we have 60,000 tech workers in this area. 60,000. That sounds like a lot. The problem is Washington has 250,000. 250,000. So when you really start to break down the numbers, you see what we're really up against when you're talking about Amazon, and that's significant. The other thing I liked is in our coverage, we quoted Art Pope. Art Pope had some really good points about, should the companies who have been here essentially subsidize this? So you got to have balance. You got to get people from both sides. And I thought the Amazon stuff was some of the most fascinating thing we did. The other story we recently did was about Union Station, and I think Union Station's fascinating. I'd say the first time I saw it, it was much smaller than I thought, if you guys have been down there. But it's an $80 million investment, and there are a lot of questions in this area about are people going to use trains? Are the buses, is that going to work? Is this really, really going to be effective? So it's our job to sort of question whether or not this investment is going to pay off. There's no question that the warehouse group, that area is exploding. The dollars are flowing into that area, but we'll see if people really use the station and what that means long term. But I thought that was just absolutely, absolutely fascinating. There have been a lot of conversations where I've learned a lot in my time at Triangle Business Journal. One that really jumped out to me was, well, first of all, we had people from the British Embassy come by and talk to us. And that was interesting. The first time people from the British Embassy had come by since Brexit. Britain's obviously looking for new markets, trying to get into North Carolina, places like that. So you're like, there are implications from these international things. But the other was I talked to Shane Stevens. Shane Stevens is the general consul for Ireland. He's based out of Atlanta. He has the whole Southeast. So Ireland is trying to get North Carolina investment, try to work with North Carolina companies. And you're seeing a lot of this if you read TVJ. But the thing he talked about that I thought was fascinating is how Ireland has a much more educated economy, or educated workforce than you might think. They put a big emphasis on that. They also have a tax rate of 12.5%. 12.5%. So, when you're sitting here talking to a guy who's in Atlanta, who's out there recruiting people, that's his job, and their corporate tax rate is 12.5%. Again, regardless of your politics, regardless of what you think of Donald Trump, those things that are happening in Washington and that corporate tax rate, that matters because those companies are watching those dollars. They're looking at what's the bottom line for us and what's the implication for that. And those are the types of things that I thought was really, really helpful. Ireland's got 4.5 million people, half the size of North Carolina. North Carolina had $379 million in exports in 2015. A lot of dollars to Ireland, a lot of dollars and probably a lot more. The other point he made is after Brexit happened, Ireland is the only English-speaking country in the European Union, the only naturally English-speaking company. So you're sitting there going, that's an enormous advantage for a company that's trying to jump into Europe, where you can go to a place that has 12.5%. Don't tweet this, but I'm just saying, when you're talking about companies like Red Hat and the companies that we have here, you have to make sure that you're taking care of them and that what they need, and that you're smart about it because there are other competitors out there in the field, okay? So please don't tweet that I said Red Hat's moving to Ireland. But you're seeing Acuvia, PPD, Aerie Pharmaceuticals, and Red Hat are all ramping up in Ireland. There's more of that coming. On the local level, one of my favorite stories that we did is if you guys have anybody been to Chef and Farmer? Have you ever been to the Chef and Farmer in Kinston? So fabulous restaurant in Kinston 10 years ago. Nothing's happening in downtown Kinston. They start this restaurant, which is just a terrific restaurant. And all of a sudden, Kinston's kind of hopping. There are businesses coming in downtown Kinston. We went down there, did a whole big centerpiece on Kinston and why it was being revived. The restaurant has driven it, but there were some other things that were going on. So I went and had lunch with B.J. Murphy, who was the mayor at the time. And he was telling me that one of the things that now they had people interested in Kinston, they had businesses coming in, they had to find a way to say yes, is the way he put it. We have to find a way to get these businesses to want to come to Kinston, to want to invest in our community, and we can't have lots of red tape. We can't be like maybe some other communities can be. We have to make that work. And so they were seeing some investment. Social Vodka from Raleigh moved down there, put a factory down there essentially, or a small factory, a small plant, and other people were coming in. Well, my point is, when you've got something that's working, you have to be careful about it. So 2 weeks after this story ran, they had an election. Murphy's a Republican. The Democrat won the election. People in Kinston have a right to decide who they think their mayor should be. It's not for me to say. But I am saying, when you're talking about the revenues that are coming in on a local level, you have to be careful. I was very surprised by that decision. Again, I'm not in Lenore. It's not my vote. But I'm like, when you're seeing something grow, you need to be cognizant of those revenue streams, whatever you are. Making payroll is hard. Making payroll is really hard. Like I said, having come up through the News Observer and at other places, it's not something that I was quite as attuned to when I was at the N&O. When you're on the journalism side, you're divorced from advertising, and that's good and bad to some extent. But when I first got to TBJ, I started going to some of our seminars. Amanda Hoyle did a seminar with commercial real estate people, and they were talking about the challenges that they faced. And it's really hard for commercial real estate people in this market to find workers. The good news is our unemployment's 4.5%, something like that. The bad news is if you're trying to build a building, you're paying a guy $13 an hour, and you're planning on him being there on Monday to build your building, but he's paying him $14 an hour, and Monday he's down the street of that guy. And that's really difficult. One of the reasons you're seeing houses not get completed as quickly is a lot of these places are just having a hard time getting workers to just, one, to find them, and two, to keep them, because the competition for the labor force is so intense. And we're definitely hearing that, across the market about that's been difficult. Lots of other entrepreneurs I've talked to, just making payroll, keeping the revenues coming in, it's just more difficult than I would have thought as a young sports writer. I've learned to really appreciate these people who take risks. I talked to a woman the other day, started a pool company. She spent $90,000. It's a lot of money to start a pool cleaning company, $90,000. That's a lot of cash to put down, and that's just for a small company. Even in a larger, Tom Dundon spends hundreds of millions of dollars to buy the Carolina Hurricanes. Right now, attendance is not that great. They're trying to figure that out. You can bet that a year or two from now, they're going to be talking about how they're going to drive revenue to cover that investment. And that's going to drive some of their decisions that the Canes start to make, including, the level of team and maybe where they play, who knows. But you spend $450 million on something or whatever it is, you're going to start thinking long and hard about what your revenues are. The ratings battle between Channel 11 and Channel 5, I've just found fascinating. It's much closer than it ever used to be. When I was at WRAL, Channel 11's doing really well. Those ratings mean revenue. Those revenues, they have implications, right? And I think that's really, really been a fascinating thing. This past weekend, I went to Carolina. I was at the Daily Tar Heel. We had this big reunion at the Daily Tar Heel. And on Saturday night, 400 people at the Carolina Inn, stuff like that. And it turns out that the Daily Tar Heel is in trouble. So the next day, they had this session to talk to all of us about the situation with the Daily Tar Heel. They're down to, used to have $1 million in revenue a year, $1 million in the bank. Now they're down to one full-time employee, $700,000 is basically their budget, and they've got $85,000 in the bank, $85,000 in the bank. And we're all going, that doesn't sound really good. And so we're sitting here going, you guys had a lease for $9,500 a month, and you're going through six-figure deficits. That doesn't work. You don't have to be a young sports writer to figure out that doesn't work, and all of a sudden you're in trouble. And that's one of the things that I've learned is you gotta watch those numbers. Local businesses here, Mitch was asking me about this. I would say that across the board, what we hear is really positive. What you see in the report, in the pages of Triangle Business Journal, is a lot of companies adding jobs, a lot of investment, a lot of growth. It's stunning to see what the pharmaceutical field is doing. It's stunning to see what's happening in commercial real estate. Used to be, $20 a square foot. Now you're seeing $30 a square foot across the market, which is pretty amazing. American Underground, downtown Raleigh, downtown Durham, Chapel Hill's, $25 a square foot. those numbers are much higher than they used to be. Unfortunately for us, they actually raised our rent as well, so we're going to move across the street. We should have done a longer-term lease. But that's actually happened across the board, and that could have implications for local businesses. If you've been in downtown Raleigh for years and years and years, and your rent's about to go $30 a square foot, that could mean something. You know, how much more can you get out of a business down there? But at the end of the day, what I've learned is you have to have revenue. It has to be significant revenue. You have to have, you have to be careful with your resources. And that's what we try to cover, and that's what we try to do. And we try to ask good questions, sometimes better than others. But at the end of the day, like I said, all journalism starts with a really good question. And you know, the question about how much does a hog poop? The answer is about 10 times more than any of us. And so, you know, if you think about that, that has implications in Duplin County and Wallace and things like that. And so that's why they won a Pulitzer Prize. Don't know if I'll win one of those, but I enjoy being at TBJ and trying to ask questions of people that readers like y'all want to know, and it's been a lot of fun. Like I said, and I enjoy being on the radio with you guys. We we try to not be political, but just like what do the numbers mean and what are the implications for this.